Before he became the most feared name in history, before his empire stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, before kings trembled at the whisper of Mongol horses on the wind, he was just a boy named Temüjin, abandoned on the frozen steppe with his starving family, hunted by his own people, wearing the chains of slavery around his neck. This is not the story you think you know. This is the tale of how a child with nothing, no tribe, no protection, no future, rose from absolute desolation to forge the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, rewriting the fate of civilizations from China to Europe. One man, one lifetime, 1/5 of humanity brought under a single banner. But at what cost? And who was the man behind the legend? He died nearly 800 years ago, yet his tomb has never been found. According to legend, 1,000 horses trampled the ground where he was buried, and every witness to the funeral was executed to preserve the secret. His genetic legacy lives in roughly 16 million men alive today, 1 in every 200. He destroyed cities so completely that they were never rebuilt. He slaughtered so many people that forests reclaimed farmland and carbon levels in the atmosphere dropped. Yet he also created the Silk Road's golden age, established religious freedom, promoted merit over birth, and connected East and West in ways that shaped the modern world. His name is Genghis Khan. And this is his story. Not the myth, not the propaganda, but the brutal, beautiful, terrifying truth of the man who conquered the world. Segment 1. Before the legend, life in the shadows. The year is 1162, though no one on the vast Mongolian steppe is counting. Time here is measured not in years, but in seasons. In the freeze that kills your livestock, in the brief summer that brings grass for the horses, in the autumn that determines whether your family will survive another winter. The land itself is merciless, a sea of grass stretching beyond imagination, broken only by jagged mountains and rivers that run cold even in summer. At night, the temperature plummets so drastically that men have frozen to death mere steps from their tents. During the day, the sun beats down without mercy, and dust storms can blind you, choke you, bury your entire camp if you're caught exposed. This is the world into which Temüjin is born, a world where survival is never guaranteed, where a single bad winter can wipe out entire clans, where violence is as common as breathing. His father, Yasujii, is a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, part of the larger Mongol tribe. But chieftain here means little. He commands perhaps 40 families, owns a few hundred horses, and lives in a felt tent called a gur that must be dismantled and moved every few weeks as the animals exhaust the grazing lands. Imagine the interior of that gur on the night of Temüjin's birth. Smoke from the central fire curls upward through the roof opening, the only source of light and warmth. The felt walls block some wind, but not all. Drafts slip through gaps, making the flames dance. Temüjin's mother, Holun, lies on piled furs, exhausted from labor, while women from neighboring families attend her. Outside, men drink fermented mare's milk, arag, and tend to horses that stamp and snort in the darkness. When the baby emerges, he is clutching a blood clot in his fist, a sign, the shamans later say, that he is destined to be a warrior. His father names him after a Tatar chieftain he recently killed in battle, a common practice meant to transfer the enemy's strength to the child. From his very first breath, Temüjin's identity is bound to violence, to the endless cycle of raids and revenge that defines steppe politics. But there is something else in the air that night, something the adults don't speak of around the fire: fear. The Mongol tribes are weak, fragmented, constantly warring among themselves, while more powerful neighbors, the Jin dynasty to the south, the Tatars to the east, the Merkits and Naimans to the west, press in on all sides. To be Mongol in the 12th century is to be prey as often as predator. Raiders can appear without warning, stealing horses, kidnapping women, killing any man who resists. There is no government, no law, no protection except what your own kinsmen can provide. And if your kinsmen are few or weak, you are already dead. You just don't know it yet. Temüjin's childhood is defined by constant movement and perpetual insecurity. By age 5, he's already learning to ride, clinging to a horse's back while older boys laugh at his falls. By 6, he can shoot a small bow, though his arrows rarely hit their targets. By 7, He's helping tend the herds, spending long days alone on the grasslands with only the wind and the hawks for company. The work is endless and exhausting. Driving animals to water, watching for predators and thieves, collecting dried dung for fuel, repairing equipment that constantly breaks down under the harsh conditions. Life for a steppe child is not gentle. Winters bring frostbite and hunger. Summers bring biting insects and scorching heat. The diet is monotonous: meat, milk, and more meat. Vegetables are rare. Grain is a luxury. When times are hard, and times are often hard, families eat the weakest horses, then the sheep, then the dogs. When those are gone, they boil leather straps and eat the resulting paste. Starvation is an intimate acquaintance, never far from the door. But Temüjin also experiences moments of beauty that will stay with him forever. The sight of 10,000 horses running across the steppe, their hooves like thunder, the taste of fresh mare's milk in spring, the songs his mother sings while working, old ballads about heroes and spirits, the way the stars fill the sky at night, so many and so bright that the heavens seem alive. There is a freedom here too, a wildness. No walls, no cities, no masters, just the land and the sky and your own strength. When Temüjin is about 8 or 9 years old, his father decides it's time to arrange his marriage. This is business, not romance. Marriages cement alliances between clans, creating obligations of mutual support that might mean the difference between survival and extinction. Yasuji takes Temüjin east, riding for days until they reach the territory of the Ongjarat tribe. There, they meet a man named Destined, who has a daughter about Temüjin's age, a girl named Borte with intelligent eyes and a steady demeanor. The negotiations are successful. Temüjin will stay with Destined's family for a time, working for his future father-in-law in the traditional way. The betrothal is sealed with gifts. Yasuji leaves one of his best horses, a sable coat, and promises of future cooperation. As Temüjin watches his father ride away across the endless grass, he feels something he's never felt before, a strange mixture of pride and abandonment. He is becoming a man, taking on adult responsibilities. But he is also alone, separated from his mother and siblings, living among strangers. Yasuji never makes it home. On the return journey, he stops to share a meal with a group of Tatars, not recognizing them as enemies. Perhaps he is tired, perhaps careless, or perhaps the Tatars are too good at hiding their intentions. They offer him fermented milk, and he drinks. By the time he realizes the air ag is poisoned, it's too late. He manages to reach his own camp, but the damage is done. He dies in agony over the course of several days, his body racked with convulsions while shamans chant uselessly over him. A servant rides hard to Destined's camp with the news. Temüjin, now perhaps 9 years old, races home on horseback, pushing his animal to exhaustion. When he arrives, his father is already dead, wrapped in felt, and placed on a high platform where birds will consume his flesh, the traditional sky burial of the steppe. Temüjin does not cry. Boys who cry do not survive here. But something hardens inside him, a core of ice that will never fully melt. And now the true nightmare begins. With Yasuji dead, his small coalition of families begins to fracture. The grazing lands he controlled become disputed territory. Rival clans circle like wolves, waiting to see if his widow and children can hold what's theirs. The answer comes quickly: they cannot. One by one, the families who swore allegiance to Yasuji pack up their jares and ride away, following more powerful chieftains who can offer better protection and opportunities for plunder. The final betrayal comes from within. Temüjin's own clan, the Temüjin, decides that Yasuji's family is now a liability, extra mouths to feed with no strong man to lead them. The clan's leaders, particularly a man named Targatai, decide to abandon Holun and her children on the steppe. They pack up in the night, leaving the family behind with minimal supplies, a handful of worn-out horses, and no protection. When Temüjin wakes to find the camp gone, the full horror of their situation becomes clear. His mother has 5 children to protect: Temüjin and his younger brothers Khazar, Kachian, and Temüj, plus a half-brother named Begtur from Yasuji's earlier wife. She is a widow with no male protector in a society where women alone are targets for abduction and violence. They have been cast out, left to die. But Holun is not ordinary. She seizes a banner, the horsetail standard that represents clan authority, and rides after the departing families, shaming them, cursing them, demanding they honor their obligations. A few families, moved by her courage or perhaps shamed by their own cowardice, briefly return. But not for long. Within days, they slip away again. And Holan is left with the terrible reality. She and her children are alone. What follows are years that would break most people. Years that hardly appear in the heroic chronicles, but define everything that comes after. They settle near the Onan River, in a region remote enough that they might avoid raiders, but harsh enough that survival requires constant labor. Holan digs roots with her hands, her palms bleeding and calloused. The children fish with crude hooks, gather wild garlic and berries, set snares for marmots and rabbits. They learn to move quietly, because noise attracts attention, and attention means death. When they catch a fish, they cook it immediately and eat it entirely, bones and all, because they don't know when the next meal will come. Temüjin, the eldest boy, becomes the family's hunter. He fashions arrows from whatever he can find, tracks small game across the grasslands, learns to read signs in the dirt and grass. He fails more often than he succeeds. There are days when the family eats nothing but roots and water. There are nights when they huddle together against the cold, using their own body heat to survive. The psychological weight is crushing. They are outcasts, the lowest of the low. Other Mongols see them as carrion, already dead but not yet buried. When they encounter other groups, they are mocked, spat upon, driven away. Temüjin develops a hunger that has nothing to do with food, a burning rage against the injustice of their situation, against the men who abandoned them, against a world that values only strength and punishes weakness without mercy. Tensions within the family reach a breaking point. Begtur, the half-brother, is slightly older and stronger than Temüjin. He begins asserting dominance, taking the best portions of food, claiming authority as the eldest. One day, he steals a fish that Temüjin caught and a bird that Khazar shot. It's a small thing, but in their desperate circumstances, it's everything. It's a challenge to Temüjin's role as provider and protector. Temüjin and Khazar make a decision that will haunt them and reveal the kind of man Temüjin is becoming. They take their bows, stalk Begtur to a hillside where he's watching the horses, and shoot him down like an animal. Begtur sees them coming, knows what they intend, and sits calmly on the grass facing them. "You would kill your own brother?" he asks, but he doesn't run or beg. He dies with arrows in his chest, staring at his killers with reproach in his eyes. When Holan discovers what they've done, her grief and fury are terrible. She screams at them, calls them monsters, tears at her clothes in anguish. "You are like wild animals," she shouts, "who would eat their own kind. We have nothing, no one, and now you've killed your own brother." For days, she won't look at Temüjin, won't speak to him. The guilt and shame burrow deep into him. But so does something else. The understanding that survival requires ruthlessness, that hesitation kills, that the world is cruel and only the cruel survive. But even outcasts can be prey. One day, Teyikiad warriors arrive at their small camp, perhaps 30 riders, armed and confident. They're there to finish what they started, to eliminate Yasuji's line before any of the boys grow strong enough to seek revenge. Temüjin runs, abandoning his family and fleeing into the forest like a hunted animal. For 9 days, he hides in the thick woods near the river, drinking from streams, eating nothing, barely sleeping. The Teyikiad systematically search the area, beating the bushes, following tracks. Finally, hunger and exhaustion betray him. He's found and captured. They place a wooden kang around his neck, a heavy board that fits like a pillory, making it impossible to lie down or rest properly. He becomes their slave, dragged from camp to camp, displayed as an example of what happens to those who defy clan authority. He carries water, tends fires, and endures beatings and mockery. At night, he lies awake under the stars, the kang biting into his shoulders, wondering if this is how he'll die, as entertainment for his captors, forgotten by everyone who ever knew him. But Temüjin refuses to accept this fate. During a festival, when the Teyikiad are drunk and distracted, he seizes his chance. He strikes his guard with the kang itself, using the wooden board as a weapon, and runs into the darkness. Still wearing the kang, unable to use his hands properly, he plunges into the Onan River and submerges himself beneath an overhanging bank, breathing through a tiny gap between the water and the earth. The Temüjids search through the night, combing the riverbanks with torches. One man, a low-status member of the clan named Sorkin, spots Temüjin hiding in the water. For a long moment, their eyes meet. Temüjin prepares to die, but Sorkin says nothing, simply moves on, letting the torchlight pass. Hours later, when the search has moved elsewhere, Sorkin returns alone. He removes the Kang, gives Temüjin a bow and a handful of arrows, and tells him to run and never come back. "You have fire in your eyes," Sorkin tells him quietly. "I do not know if you will survive, but if you do, remember that not all men are without honor." Temüjin disappears into the night, returning eventually to his family's hidden camp. He is 15 or 16 years old, marked by scars both visible and invisible. He has been abandoned, starved, enslaved, and nearly killed. He has murdered his own brother. He has learned that the world respects only power, that loyalty is rare and precious, that memory is long and revenge is sacred. He is no longer a boy, and he will never forget what was done to him. The winters continue to pass, each one a test of endurance. The family grows stronger through sheer stubbornness, their bodies hardened by constant labor, their spirits tempered like steel in a forge. Temüjin becomes a skilled hunter and tracker. Khazar develops into an exceptional archer. They learn to survive on almost nothing, to move like ghosts across the steppe, to trust no one and rely only on each other. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Temüjin begins to plan. He doesn't yet know exactly what he's planning for. He has no army, no wealth, no status. But the rage inside him has crystallized into something colder and more dangerous: ambition. He remembers every slight, every betrayal, every face of those who abandoned his family. He remembers Begdar's dying eyes. He remembers the weight of the Kang on his neck. He remembers being less than nothing. And he decides that he will become everything. Segment 2. Rise of the Warrior, the Path to Glory. When Temüjin finally returns to claim his bride Borte from the Anjurat, he is no longer the boy who was left there years ago. He is nearly 20, lean and hard from years of deprivation, his eyes carrying shadows that unsettle even hardened warriors. Day Sechin honors the old betrothal agreement, perhaps out of respect for the arrangement he made with Yasuji, perhaps because he sees something formidable in this young man who survived what should have killed him. Borte joins Temüjin's family in their isolated camp, bringing with her a magnificent gift from her father, a coat of black sable fur, the kind worn by khans and high nobles. It's the most valuable thing Temüjin has ever possessed, worth more than everything else his family owns combined. And he immediately understands what it represents: not warmth, but leverage. The coat is capital, a tool he can use to begin building the alliances he desperately needs. Temüjin knows he cannot remain an outcast forever. To survive on the steppe, you need a tribe. To lead a tribe, you need a patron, someone already powerful who can vouch for you, provide protection while you gather followers of your own. There is only one logical choice: Togrul Khan, leader of the Karait tribe, one of the most powerful confederations on the steppe. Years ago, Togrul and Yasuji had been sworn brothers, bound by oaths and shared ritual. It's a thin thread to pull on, but it's the only thread Temüjin has. He rides to Togrul's camp, presents the sable coat as a gift, and invokes his father's memory. "My father called you brother," Temüjin says, kneeling in the formal manner. "I have nothing but this coat and my loyalty. Accept me as your vassal, and I will serve you as my father did." Togrul, an aging Khan who has survived decades of steppe politics through cunning as much as strength, looks at the ragged young man before him and makes a calculation. The coat is valuable. The name Yasuji still carries some weight. And this Temüjin, while poor, has clearly survived circumstances that should have destroyed him, which suggests either extraordinary luck or extraordinary ability. Either way, accepting him costs little and might prove useful. "I will be your father," Togrul declares formally. "Your scattered people I will reunite. Your torn people I will make whole again." It's a beginning, a toehold, a chance. But the steppe does not allow anyone to build power unopposed. Within months of his marriage, disaster strikes. A raiding party from the Merkits, 300 warriors led by experienced commanders, descends on Temüjin's camp just before dawn. The attack is not random, it's calculated revenge. Years earlier, Yasuji had stolen Holan from a Merkit man named Chilidu, triggering a blood feud that has simmered for 2 decades. Now the Merkits have come to collect the debt in the traditional way, by stealing Yasuji's daughter-in-law. Temüjin wakes to shouting and the thunder of hooves. There's no time to organize a defense, no time to do anything but run. He grabs his mother and siblings, throws them on horses, and flees into the nearby mountains, abandoning Borte to save the rest of his family. It's a brutal calculation made in seconds. Save everyone or save no one. As they ride into the darkness, he can hear Borte screaming his name. The Merkits capture Borte and carry her back to their territory. She is given to Chilidu as a wife, forced into his bed, made to live as property in a strange camp surrounded by enemies. The shame of it, the violation, the helplessness, it burns through Temüjin like acid. He has failed in the most fundamental duty of a husband, to protect his wife. Every day she remains captive is another wound to his honor, another proof that he is still weak, still powerless, still the boy with a king around his neck. But now he has options he didn't have before. He rides immediately to Togrul Khan, throws himself down in supplication, and begs for help. Togrul, bound by his recent oath and perhaps moved by genuine sympathy, agrees to provide troops. But he suggests bringing in additional allies to ensure success, specifically Jamuka, another young Mongol warrior who grew up near Temüjin and once swore brotherhood with him during childhood games. Jamuka is everything Temüjin is not. Charismatic, well-connected, born into good circumstances, comfortable with the social graces that steppe politics require. Where Temüjin is intense and brooding, Jamuka is quick-witted and charming. But they were friends once, and Jamuka agrees to help. Together with Togrul's forces, they assemble an army of perhaps 20,000 riders, a massive force by steppe standards, drawn from multiple tribes united by the promise of plunder and the spectacle of a major campaign. They descend on the Merkits like the wrath of the eternal sky. The attack is overwhelming, coordinated, merciless. Temüjin leads one wing personally, driving his horse until it foams at the mouth, shouting Borte's name as he cuts through enemy warriors. The Merkits, caught unprepared for such a massive response, scatter and flee. Their camps are destroyed, their herds seized, their women and children taken as captives in turn. And finally, riding through the chaos of the burning camp, Temüjin finds her. Borte stumbles from a captured tent, disheveled and exhausted, and they fall into each other's arms. She is alive. She is free. But both of them know that something has been taken that can never be restored. She is pregnant, whether with Temüjin's child from before the raid or from her captivity, no one can say. The boy she eventually gives birth to, Joki, will always carry the shadow of that uncertainty, and the question of his paternity will poison relationships for decades. The rescue of Borte establishes Temüjin's reputation. He's no longer just an outcast survivor. He's a man who can call forth armies, who keeps his oaths, who never stops until he achieves his objectives. Warriors begin drifting to his banner, younger sons with no inheritance, adventurers seeking glory, outcasts like himself who have been rejected by the traditional clan structure. For the next few years, Temüjin and Jamuka operate as partners, their camps traveling together, their warriors raiding in concert. They renew their childhood oath of brotherhood, becoming Anda through formal ceremony, exchanging gifts, drinking together, swearing to be as one person with 2 bodies. On the surface, it's a perfect alliance. But beneath, tensions simmer. The differences between them become more apparent over time. Jamuka believes in the old ways, aristocratic rule, where leadership flows through noble bloodlines and clan hierarchies. He surrounds himself with other highborn warriors, makes decisions through consensus with his peers, respects the traditional privileges of the old families. Temüjin, shaped by his years of deprivation and exclusion, increasingly rejects this system. He promotes men based on loyalty and ability rather than birth. He welcomes outcasts and refugees whom the traditional clans have rejected. He's building something new, though he may not fully articulate it yet. A meritocracy born from his own experience of being judged unworthy by the old standards. The break comes suddenly. After a successful raid, the Allied camp celebrates with fermented milk and roasted meat. In the midst of the revelry, several clans approach Temüjin privately and declare him their Khan, their supreme leader. It's a shocking breach of protocol, bypassing Jamuka entirely, rejecting the established hierarchy. Temüjin accepts. Whether he orchestrated this moment or it was truly spontaneous, the result is the same. The partnership is over. Jamuka is furious at what he perceives as betrayal. The bonds of Anda, supposedly sacred and unbreakable, have been shattered. The alliance dissolves immediately, and both men begin preparing for war. The steppe holds its breath, waiting to see which vision will triumph. The old order that Jamuka represents, or the new one Temüjin, is forging from nothing. The first major confrontation comes at a place called Dalanbal's Hut. Jamuka assembles a coalition of 13 tribes, 30,000 warriors united against the upstart who threatens the traditional order. Temüjin can field perhaps 13,000 men, and many of them are untested in large-scale warfare. On paper, it's a massacre waiting to happen. The battle is brutal and chaotic. Mongol warfare at this time is not the sophisticated, disciplined machine it will later become. It's swirling masses of horsemen shooting arrows, breaking apart, reforming, charging, and retreating in waves. Temüjin's forces fight with desperate courage, but they're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. By late afternoon, his line breaks. Warriors scatter across the steppe, and Temüjin himself barely escapes with his core followers. Jamuka wins the battle decisively, and in victory, he makes a choice that will define the rest of his life. He orders 70 of Temüjin's captured nobles boiled alive in 70 cauldrons, displaying their bodies as a warning to anyone who would challenge the traditional order. It's meant to be a demonstration of power, a re-establishment of proper hierarchy. Instead, it backfires catastrophically. Steppe warriors are accustomed to violence. They expect raids, battles, honorable deaths. But mass torture of captured nobles violates unwritten codes of conduct. It's seen as excessive, as the action of a man ruled by spite rather than strength. The very cruelty meant to cement Jamuka's authority instead alienates his own supporters. Over the following months, warriors begin defecting to Temüjin, disgusted by Jamuka's methods and increasingly attracted to Temüjin's different approach, harsh but fair, demanding but rewarding, brutal to enemies but generous to followers. Temüjin's camp becomes a haven for the dispossessed. He welcomes men regardless of their tribal background, caring only about loyalty and capability. He feeds them from his own herds when times are hard. He shares plunder equitably rather than giving the best to highborn favorites. He creates clear rules and enforces them consistently, something revolutionary in a world where justice has always been arbitrary and dependent on personal connections. One day, a skilled warrior named Jeeb arrives in Temüjin's camp under unusual circumstances. He had fought against Temüjin in a previous skirmish and shot Temüjin's favorite horse out from under him. Now, with his own side defeated, he throws himself on Temüjin's mercy and confesses, "I am the man who killed your horse. If you wish to kill me, I will not resist. But if you spare me, I will serve you faithfully for the rest of my life." Temüjin stares at him for a long moment. By traditional codes, he should execute this man who cost him a valuable animal and nearly killed him. But Temüjin sees something else: courage, honesty, and skill. "Any man who admits his deeds so openly is a man I can trust," he declares. "From this day forward, you are Jeeb, the arrow. Serve me as you have promised." Jeeb becomes one of his greatest generals, never wavering in loyalty, proving the value of Temüjin's principle: judge men by their actions and potential, not their past or birth. The consolidation of power continues through a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and strategic marriages. Temüjin systematically eliminates rivals, absorbs defeated tribes into his growing confederation, and builds a military structure unlike anything the steppe has seen before. He organizes his army into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands, each with clear chains of command, each responsible for specific tactical roles. He emphasizes discipline, coordination, and intelligence gathering. One of his most brilliant innovations is the systematic use of terror as a weapon. When cities resist, he doesn't just defeat them. He annihilates them so completely that news of the destruction spreads faster than his army. causing other cities to surrender without fighting. When tribes betray him, he doesn't just punish the leaders. He scatters the entire tribe, distributing its members among his loyal units so they can never reform as a threat. It's ruthless, calculated, and devastatingly effective. But the path to dominance is not straightforward. There are setbacks, betrayals, moments when everything seems about to collapse. Togrul Khan, his patron and supposed father figure, grows increasingly jealous and fearful of Temüjin's growing power. Their relationship deteriorates into suspicion and finally outright hostility. When Togrul attacks without warning, hoping to eliminate his former vassal before he becomes unstoppable, Temüjin is caught unprepared. His forces are scattered, his camp overrun. He retreats with just a handful of loyal followers to a remote lake called Baljuna. The time at Lake Baljuna becomes legendary in Mongol history. 19 men, all that remain of his following, drink the muddy water together and swear an oath. If Temüjin achieves ultimate victory, they will share in it. If he falls, they will fall together. These men, from diverse tribal backgrounds, become the core of his inner circle. They prove that loyalty forged in adversity is stronger than any bond of blood or tradition. From this lowest point, Temüjin rebuilds with terrifying speed. He calls in old debts, forms new alliances, and launches a campaign against Togrul that is swift and merciless. The Khairate, once the most powerful confederation on the steppe, are destroyed as a political entity. Togrul himself dies fleeing into the wilderness, killed by Nayman guards who don't recognize the once great Khan, now reduced to a ragged refugee. One by one, the remaining powers fall. The Tatars, who poisoned his father, are systematically exterminated. Every male taller than a cart wheel is executed, and the survivors are absorbed into Mongol units where their ethnic identity will be erased. The Merkits, who stole Borte, are hunted to extinction. The Naymans, the last major opposition, are crushed in a decisive battle where their Khan dies and their army disintegrates. By 1206, after more than 20 years of warfare, Temüjin has achieved the impossible. He has united the Mongol tribes, along with the Tatars, Khairate, Merkits, Naymans, and dozens of smaller groups, into a single political entity. The traditional clan structure has been shattered and reformed under his command. Where there were once dozens of quarreling tribes, there is now one nation. A great assembly is called a Kurultai, where representatives from across the newly unified territories gather. Shamans perform ancient rituals, declaring that the eternal blue sky has granted Temüjin its mandate. He is proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title whose exact meaning is debated but generally understood as universal ruler or oceanic Khan, suggesting power as vast and encompassing as the sea. He is 44 years old. He has gone from enslaved outcast to emperor, from owning nothing to commanding hundreds of thousands of warriors. But this is not the end of his story. The unification of the Mongols is not his final achievement. It's merely the foundation for something far greater. Because now, with the steppe united behind him, Genghis Khan turns his attention outward, and the world will never be the same. Segment 3. Myths, Secrets, and Unsolved Mysteries. Long before he became Genghis Khan, before his armies shook the foundations of civilizations, Temüjin encountered something on the steppe that would shape his understanding of destiny and power, something that the historians rarely emphasize but that shadowed his entire life: the shamans and the voices of the eternal sky. The Mongols lived in a world saturated with spiritual forces. The land itself was alive with meaning. Every mountain had its guardian spirit, every river its deity, every unusual rock formation its sacred significance. The sky, Tungri, the eternal blue heaven, was the supreme deity, the source of all authority and fortune. To succeed was to have the favor of Tungri. To fail was to have lost it. And mediating between the human world and these vast cosmic forces were the shamans. Men and women who could journey to the spirit realm, communicate with ancestors, see the future, and curse or bless with terrible power. When Temüjin was still building his following, struggling to survive between the cracks of tribal politics, a shaman named Tebtingri became deeply intertwined with his rise. Tebtingri was the son of one of Temüjin's early supporters, a man whose 7 sons all became part of the growing movement. But Teb Tingri himself was different, gaunt, intense, prone to trances where he would shake violently and speak in voices that weren't his own. He claimed to ride a white horse up into the sky at night, where he conversed directly with Tungri and received prophetic visions. One day, Teb Tingri emerged from a trance and made a proclamation that electrified everyone who heard it. God has spoken to me. The eternal sky has granted the earth to Temüjin and to his sons. He has been chosen to rule all peoples. For a man still struggling to command even a portion of the Mongols, this was extraordinary, a divine endorsement that legitimized his ambitions and suggested that resistance to him was resistance to heaven itself. Temüjin embraced this prophecy. He understood the power of divine sanction in a world where most people believed implicitly in spiritual forces. With Teb Tingri's pronouncements supporting him, warriors who might have hesitated joined his banner. Rivals who might have fought harder submitted instead, unwilling to oppose the will of Tingri. The shaman became a key part of his political machine, providing spiritual validation for what Temüjin was building through violence and strategy. But Teb Tingri, like many who taste power, grew ambitious. He began inserting himself into political decisions, claiming that Tungri had revealed this policy or that judgment. More dangerously, he began sowing discord within Temüjin's own family, telling Genghis's younger brothers that he had received visions of their future greatness, suggesting they might be destined to replace Temüjin himself. Whether Teb Tingri genuinely believed these visions or was simply maneuvering for greater influence is impossible to know. But the effect was to create division where unity was essential. Genghis Khan faced a terrible dilemma. Teb Tingri had been instrumental in his rise, and his spiritual authority was genuinely believed by many followers. But the shaman was also becoming a threat to the stability of the regime, undermining the very structure he had helped build. The situation came to a head when Teb Tingri publicly humiliated one of Genghis's brothers during a gathering, claiming spiritual authority over him. Genghis made a decision that would define his relationship with spiritual power for the rest of his life. He allowed his brother to challenge Teb Tingri to a wrestling match, a traditional way to settle disputes on the steppe. During the match, held inside a tent away from witnesses, Teb Tingri's back was broken. The official story was that it was an accident during the contest. The reality, understood by everyone, was that Genghis had ordered the shaman's execution. When Teb Tingri's father, Munlik, discovered his son's body and confronted Genghis, the Khan's response was chilling. Your son lied about his visions and sought to divide my family. Tungri itself grew angry with him and took his life breath. How can I be blamed for what heaven has done? It was a brilliantly calculated response. Genghis acknowledged the power and reality of spiritual forces. He didn't reject Tungri or claim the gods were irrelevant. But he established that he, not the shamans, would interpret what heaven required. From that moment forward, shamans would serve his regime, not direct it. They would provide spiritual legitimacy, perform necessary rituals, and offer counsel, but political and military decisions would remain in his hands alone. This relationship with the divine became central to Genghis Khan's identity and the empire's ideology. He genuinely seems to have believed that he was chosen by Tungri, that his unprecedented success proved heaven's favor. Every victory reinforced this belief. Every conquest was evidence of divine will. His letters to foreign rulers often emphasized this spiritual mandate. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. But what did Genghis Khan actually believe? What was his personal spiritual life like, beneath the political calculations? The historical sources give us only fragments, tantalizing glimpses of a complex inner life. We know he regularly climbed mountains alone to pray, removing his hat and belt in the traditional gesture of humility before heaven, bowing toward the sun. We know he attributed his victories not to his own genius, but to Tungri's support, though whether this was genuine humility or shrewd politics is debatable. We know he showed remarkable religious tolerance for his era, explicitly protecting Buddhist monks, Muslim scholars, Christian priests, and Taoist sages, exempting them from taxes and military service. This tolerance stemmed partly from pragmatic concerns about governing diverse populations, but contemporary sources suggest it also reflected a genuine intellectual curiosity about different paths to understanding the divine. There is a story, recorded in multiple sources, about an encounter late in his life with a Taoist monk named Temüjin. Genghis, now in his 60s, summoned the sage to travel thousands of miles from China to meet him in Central Asia. The journey took years. When they finally met, Genghis asked the monk if he possessed the elixir of immortality, the secret to eternal life that Chinese emperors had sought for millennia. Temüjin's response was startling. "I have no such elixir, but I can teach you how to preserve life." He then lectured the great conqueror on moderation, warning against excessive hunting, excessive drinking, excessive warfare, essentially telling Genghis that his lifestyle was killing him and no magic would change that. Most rulers would have executed someone who spoke to them with such bluntness. Genghis, instead, listened carefully, asked questions, and ordered the monk's teachings to be recorded and distributed. He didn't change his ways. He was too old, too fixed in his nature. But the fact that he sought this wisdom and respected its delivery reveals something about his inner life. He was searching for answers, aware of mortality, curious about forces beyond military strategy and political control. The greatest mystery surrounding Genghis Khan is the one that has never been solved. Where is he buried? When Genghis died in 1227, possibly from injuries sustained in a fall from a horse, possibly from illness, the sources conflict. He left explicit instructions about his burial. He wanted no monument, no marked grave, nothing that would allow enemies to desecrate his body or followers to turn his tomb into a political symbol. According to tradition, his body was returned to Mongolia and buried somewhere in the region where he was born, in the sacred mountains near the Onan and Caroline rivers. The funeral procession that carried his body killed every person it encountered along the route: shepherds, travelers, anyone who might mark the path. At the burial site itself, thousands of horses reportedly trampled the ground to eliminate all traces of digging. Everyone who attended the funeral was then executed. The soldiers who executed the funeral attendees were themselves killed. The location was meant to vanish, to become unrecoverable. And it worked. Nearly 800 years later, despite satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, extensive archaeological surveys, and the efforts of numerous expeditions, no one has found Genghis Khan's tomb. There have been promising leads. Unusual formations detected from space, legends about a valley where no birds sing, stories about guardian tribes who have protected the secret for generations. But nothing confirmed. Some believe the tomb lies beneath the Burkhan Khaldun mountain, which Genghis considered sacred, the place where he hid as a youth when fleeing the Temüjin, the place he climbed to pray. Others suggest it might be in a hidden valley whose entrance was sealed with redirected rivers. Still others wonder if there is a tomb at all, if perhaps his body was scattered across the steppe or consumed in some ritual that left nothing to find. The Mongolian government officially discourages searching for the tomb, calling it disrespectful to disturb the final resting place of the nation's father. Some areas considered likely burial sites are protected as sacred zones where excavation is forbidden. This makes archaeological investigation nearly impossible and ensures the mystery will likely endure for centuries more. But perhaps the unsolved mystery is itself the answer, the final demonstration of Genghis Khan's power that even death and time cannot diminish his ability to shape reality according to his will. He wanted to disappear, to rest undisturbed, and so he has. Another enduring mystery surrounds his genetic legacy. A genetic study published in 2003 sent shockwaves through the scientific community with a startling claim. Roughly 16 million men alive today, about 1 in every 200, carry a Y chromosome sequence that appears to originate from a single man who lived in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. The pattern of distribution matches almost perfectly with the territory of the Mongol Empire at its height. Could 16 million men truly be descended from Genghis Khan? The mathematics, while extraordinary, are actually plausible. If Genghis had dozens of children, and each of his sons and generals also had dozens of children with women from conquered territories, and those descendants were given advantages of wealth and status that allowed them to have more children in turn, the exponential growth over 35 generations could indeed produce those numbers. But here's the mystery. We can't be certain it's actually Genghis's genetic line. It could be his, or it could belong to one of his immediate ancestors or his brothers who also had large numbers of children. The paper trails don't extend back far enough to confirm identity definitively. What we can say is that someone at the founding of the Mongol Empire left a genetic impact unprecedented in human history, a biological legacy as vast as the territorial one. There are stranger tales too, stories that blur the line between history and myth. Multiple sources record that during campaigns, Genghis Khan sometimes experienced prophetic dreams or visions that guided his strategy. Before attacking the Khwarezmian Empire, he reportedly dreamed of a route through the supposedly impassable Altai Mountains, and when scouts investigated, they found the exact pass he had described. Were these genuine premonitions, lucky coincidence, or after-the-fact mythologizing by chroniclers who wanted to emphasize their ruler's supernatural connection to heaven? We'll never know, but the stories accumulated around him, building the legend of a man who could see beyond normal human perception, who had access to knowledge unavailable to others. There's also the mystery of what was in his heart regarding Jamukha. Years after their final battle, when Jamukha had been captured and brought before Genghis Khan in chains, something remarkable happened. Genghis offered his old friend mercy, offered to restore their brotherhood, offered him a position of honor. Jamukha refused, saying he would only cause trouble if allowed to live, asking instead for a noble death. Execution without spilling his blood, which on the steppe meant being wrapped tightly in carpets until suffocation occurred. Genghis granted this request, and then, according to sources, he wept. This conqueror who had ordered the deaths of millions, who had destroyed entire civilizations, cried for the friend he had been forced to kill. Was it genuine grief or political theater? Did he mourn the boy who had once played with him on the steppe, or did he mourn the road not taken, the possibility of ruling together instead of destroying each other? The sources don't tell us, and the truth died with both men. What remains are questions without answers, mysteries that deepen rather than resolve as we learn more. A tomb that cannot be found, a genetic legacy that cannot be fully verified, dreams and visions that cannot be explained, tears for a dead enemy that cannot be interpreted. Perhaps that's fitting for a man whose life itself seems impossible. A narrative so unlikely that if it appeared in fiction, critics would reject it as implausible. The abandoned child who became a world conqueror. The slave who became emperor. The man who supposedly had nothing and took everything. The mystery of Genghis Khan is not just what happened, but how, and who he truly was behind the legend that history and propaganda have built around him. Segment 4. Power, Glory, and the World They Left Behind. While Genghis Khan was forging an empire from horseback and felt tense, living on dried meat and mare's milk, the civilizations he would eventually conquer were dwelling in luxury that would have seemed incomprehensible to the steppe warriors. The contrast between the conquerors and the conquered, between the Mongol way of life and the sophisticated societies they overran, is one of the great paradoxes of history. Consider the Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia in the early 13th century. Its capital, Urgench, was a marvel of irrigation engineering, lush gardens, and architectural sophistication. The ruling Shah Muhammad II lived in palaces decorated with glazed tiles showing geometric patterns of breathtaking complexity, rooms cooled by ingenious wind towers that caught breezes and channeled them through underground water channels. His court poets composed verses in Persian that explored philosophy, love, and divine mystery with a sophistication that had been refined over centuries. His libraries contained thousands of manuscripts, copies of Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, Persian poetry, Islamic theology, astronomical charts showing the movements of planets with precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for hundreds of years. The Shah sat on a throne of gold, wore robes of silk so fine they seemed woven from light itself, ate from plates of Chinese porcelain, and drank from goblets of Byzantine glass. He commanded armies of professional soldiers who trained year-round, equipped with the finest steel weapons money could buy, supported by siege engineers who understood mathematics and mechanics. His treasury held wealth accumulated over generations, gold coins by the ton, gems from India, furs from Russia, spices from the Indies. When Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire with a letter proposing peaceful commerce, the contrast could not have been more stark. The Mongol envoys arrived on shaggy steppe ponies, dressed in leather and felt, smelling of horses and smoke. They presented a letter written in the straightforward language of a man who had learned to read as an adult, offering simple terms: trade freely and be at peace. The Shah's governor at Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, looked at these Mongol merchants and saw barbarians, saw primitives, saw people so far beneath the sophisticated Khwarezmian civilization that they could be treated with contempt. When he discovered that among the merchants were men who had previously worked as Mongol spies, he had them executed and seized their goods. It was a decision that would cost millions of lives. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding the governor be handed over for punishment. The Shah, secure in his wealth and power, refused, and then made it worse by killing the ambassadors themselves, an act of such profound violation of diplomatic norms that it couldn't be overlooked. The sophisticated, cultured Shah Muhammad had just given the unsophisticated barbarian from the steppe exactly the justification he needed. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire was one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. City after city fell: Bokhara, Samarkand, Urgench, Herat. The beautiful gardens were torn up by Mongol horses. The libraries were burned, centuries of accumulated knowledge going up in smoke. The irrigation systems were destroyed, turning farmland into desert. The population was slaughtered on a scale that beggars belief. Historical sources, even accounting for exaggeration, suggest millions died. And the Shah, who had lived in such luxury, who had commanded such wealth and power, died as a refugee on a small island in the Caspian Sea, destitute and alone, having watched his empire evaporate in less than 2 years. The pattern repeated itself across Eurasia. The Song dynasty in China was perhaps the most advanced civilization of its era. They had invented gunpowder, the compass, movable type, and paper money. Their cities held populations in the hundreds of thousands, with entertainment districts offering theater, music, fine dining, and pleasures of every kind. The imperial court in Hangzhou was so sophisticated that European travelers centuries later would still struggle to believe the accounts of its magnificence. The Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, was the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom had translated and preserved Greek learning that would otherwise have been lost, had advanced mathematics far beyond what Europe knew, had made astronomical observations and medical discoveries that represented the cutting edge of human knowledge. The Caliph lived surrounded by beauty and learning, considering himself the spiritual leader of Islam, the successor to the Prophet himself, holding authority that was both temporal and divine. All of them fell to men who lived in tents, who had no cities of their own, who were illiterate until Genghis Khan ordered the adoption of a written script, who had possessed no sophisticated technology or ancient cultural traditions. The Mongols' advantages were mobility, discipline, adaptability, and a ruthlessness born from lives where weakness meant death. They learned from every opponent, adopting Chinese siege engines, Muslim administration systems, and European diplomacy while maintaining their core strengths. The Mongol army that eventually conquered these civilizations was itself a marvel, perhaps the most significant military innovation in history. Where other armies were limited by supply lines and the need to hold territory, the Mongols brought their supplies with them on the hoof. Each warrior had multiple horses, rotating between them to prevent exhaustion. They could cover more than 100 miles in a day when necessary, appearing where enemies thought them impossible, vanishing before effective response could be organized. Their tactics emphasized intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and surgical precision. Before attacking a city, they would systematically destroy surrounding areas, creating refugees who would flee to the city and overwhelm its food supplies, while bringing tales of Mongol brutality that sapped morale. They would offer generous surrender terms to the first few cities in a region, then utterly destroy the ones that resisted, teaching a lesson that later cities would remember. They used merchants, travelers, and captured locals as spies, building comprehensive intelligence networks that gave them better information about enemies than those enemies had about them. But the Mongol conquests were not simply destruction. Genghis Khan understood something that many of his sophisticated opponents did not. Talent and knowledge have value regardless of their origin. When he conquered a city, he systematically spared craftsmen, engineers, administrators, and scholars, relocating them to Mongolia or to other parts of his empire where their skills were needed. He became, in effect, one of history's great collectors of human capital. Chinese siege engineers found themselves teaching Mongols how to build and operate trebuchets and catapults. Muslim administrators found themselves organizing taxation systems for a growing empire. Christian scribes found themselves keeping records in multiple languages. Genghis Khan was illiterate, but he understood the power of writing and ordered the adoption of the Uyghur script for Mongolian, establishing schools to teach his people. The legal code he established, the Yasa, was revolutionary in its clarity and egalitarianism. It applied to everyone, from the lowest herder to the highest noble. Theft was punished severely. Lying to superiors in military matters was punishable by death, because bad intelligence cost lives. Religious tolerance was mandated, because prosecuting people for their beliefs created instability without providing any benefit. Women had property rights that wouldn't exist in Europe for centuries. Merchants were protected, given special status, because trade enriched the empire. The empire he built became the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to India. Within its borders, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, created the first truly global economy. Ideas and goods flowed across Eurasia with unprecedented freedom. A merchant could travel from Italy to China under the protection of a single authority, carrying a Mongol passport that guaranteed safe passage. Technologies spread. Paper and printing moved west from China. Gunpowder moved in all directions. Crops and agricultural techniques were shared across regions that had never been connected before. Marco Polo's famous journey to China was only possible because the Mongols had created the infrastructure and security for such travel. The exchanges of the Silk Road reached their historical peak under Mongol administration. European kings received letters from Mongol Khans proposing alliances against mutual enemies. Chinese scholars studied Persian astronomy. Russian princes traveled to Mongolia to receive confirmation of their authority. The world, in a very real sense, became more interconnected under the Mongols than it had ever been before, or would be again until the age of European colonialism centuries later. But the cost was almost inconceivable. Entire cities ceased to exist. Regions that had supported dense populations became depopulated, sometimes for centuries. The death toll from the Mongol conquests is impossible to calculate precisely, but credible estimates range from 30 to 40 million people, roughly 10% of the world's population at the time. It may have been the deadliest series of military campaigns in human history relative to global population. And what did Genghis Khan himself think of all this? Did he see himself as a destroyer or a builder, a monster or a visionary? The few statements attributed directly to him suggest he genuinely believed he was carrying out heaven's mandate, bringing order to a chaotic world, punishing the wicked and rewarding the virtuous. He seems to have thought that resistance to his rule was not just political opposition, but moral wrong, defiance of the order that Temüjin had decreed. When he died in 1227, the empire continued to expand under his descendants. His sons and grandsons pushed into Russia, Europe, the Middle East, and southern China. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented into separate khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each adapted to local conditions, some becoming more sedentary and culturally absorbed by the people they had conquered, others maintaining steppe traditions for centuries. The Mongol legacy is perhaps history's most complicated moral question. They were responsible for death and destruction on an almost unprecedented scale. They broke the power of ancient civilizations, interrupted cultural continuities, destroyed irreplaceable libraries and monuments. The Black Death, which killed roughly a third of Europe's population in the 14th century, may have spread along the trade routes that Mongol conquests opened and protected. Yet they also created the conditions for unprecedented cultural exchange, protected religious minorities, promoted merit over birth, established legal systems that transcended tribal loyalties, and connected the world in ways that laid groundwork for the global civilization that eventually emerged. The Renaissance in Europe was partly fueled by knowledge and technologies that flowed westward through Mongol territories. The modern world's interconnection has roots in the networks the Mongol Empire established. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is the national hero, his face on the currency, his statue standing 130 feet tall outside Ulaanbaatar, his name invoked with pride. In Iran and Iraq, he is remembered as the destroyer of the Golden Age, the barbarian who burned Baghdad and ended the Abbasid Caliphate. In Russia, the Mongol yoke is remembered as centuries of oppression and extraction. In China, his legacy is complicated. The Yuan dynasty he founded is considered one of China's legitimate dynasties, but the Mongol conquest is also remembered as a time of foreign domination. The man himself remains elusive. We have no confirmed portrait made during his lifetime. The descriptions that survive, that he was tall with green or gray eyes, with a powerful build and a fierce gaze, tell us little about the person inside. The conquests and the empire tell us what he did, but not really who he was. The laws and policies tell us what he thought effective, but not what kept him awake at night. There is one story that offers a glimpse. Late in life, after decades of conquest, after his empire stretched across the known world, after he had achieved everything he set out to achieve, and more than anyone thought possible, someone asked him what the greatest pleasure in life was. His response, recorded in multiple sources, has become infamous: to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. It's a chilling statement, often quoted as evidence of his brutality and barbarism. But consider it in context. This is a man who was abandoned to die as a child, who wore a slave's kang, who watched his family starve, who lost everything and built it all back through sheer will and violence. His worldview was forged in circumstances where mercy meant death and strength meant survival. The pleasure he describes is not sadism. It's the satisfaction of never being helpless again, of never being the one crying, of having transformed from prey to predator so completely that no one will ever have power over him again. In the end, perhaps the greatest mystery of Genghis Khan is not where he's buried or how many descendants he has, but how we should remember him. As a monster who drowned civilizations in blood? As a visionary who created a new world order? As a brilliant strategist who revolutionized warfare? As a lawgiver who promoted justice and religious tolerance? As a product of his brutal environment who somehow transcended it while also embodying its worst aspects? He was, perhaps, all of these things. The boy who became a slave. The slave who became a Khan. The Khan who became an emperor. The man who started with nothing and died owning everything. The conqueror whose genetic and cultural legacy still shapes our world 8 centuries later. He left no tomb we can visit, no writings we can read in his own hand, no portrait we can study. What he left instead was the world itself, transformed by his passage, still debating his meaning, still living in the shadow of decisions made by a man who learned to survive on the frozen steppe and decided the entire world should bow to his will. Genghis Khan is dead, but the world he made is still with us, for better and for worse. And perhaps that, more than any tomb or treasure, is the legacy that defines him, not what he was, but what he did, and how it echoes endlessly through time.